Hi everybody, Nicole here from Hair of the Dog. I want to walk you through what would be a typical client edit for this image. This dog is Huck. Well, I should say this dog is Stanko, the dog formerly known as Huck. Anyway, we're going to get started, and again, this is what I would do for a typical client edit. So here we are in Lightroom in the Develop module. This is straight out of camera. First thing I usually do, my white balance looks pretty good. I usually shoot with an expo disc, so that my white balance is usually pretty spot on because I hate having to adjust that too much. And my exposure doesn't look too bad. The dog's pretty light, so I'm just going to pull down the highlights a little bit. And I'm going to pull up those shadows to bring out some of the background. And then whenever I do my highlights and shadows, oftentimes I'd like to just kind of tweak the whites and the darks, or the blacks a little bit. So when I pull down on highlights, often you might want to pull up a little bit on the whites and pull down on the blacks if you pulled up on the shadows. They just work a little bit different and a different kind of channels. I'm not super technical, so I can't tell you the exact reason why, but if you were just to pull down the highlights and pull up the shadows, you start to lose all of the contrast in your image. So by then tweaking the whites and blacks a little bit, you can add that contrast back in, but you've kind of pulled down that really bright spot and brought up that background, because before we did this, that background was really dark. So by pulling those shadows up, we can start to see a lot more in the background of this image. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead down here to vibrance. I never really touch saturation. Vibrance, I do like to bump up just a little bit, and I often bump up clarity just a little bit as well. And that's really all I'm going to do in this image to show my client. I might crop a little bit. Let's go ahead and crop. So that side is pretty dark, and I often like to use the rule of thirds. So there we go. I think that's going to be a good crop for him. And yeah, that's about it. This will be ready to show a client. So quick and easy. However, once the client ordered this, I'm going to want to finish this up. And truly, when I'm showing my clients their galleries, I do fully finish a handful of images, usually my favorite ones that I'm going to want to use for marketing anyway, and that way they can see what that final image is going to look like, because I don't want to spend my time editing a gazillion different images if they're only going to buy a few and they really just want something beautiful for their wall. So anyway, that is a story for another time. Let's jump over to Photoshop. All right, so here we are in Photoshop. You might notice that my Photoshop screen looks a little bit different than yours, and that's because I customized it. I like to have all of my tools over on the left-hand side, just so everything's kind of in one spot. And I really love using the button mode for my actions, so I can color code them and make them pretty, because pretty color-coded things make me happy. Anyway, let's start editing this in Photoshop. And this is, again, what I would do if somebody ordered a wall piece of this image. The first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to lighten up his eyes. So I'm going to Command J for a new layer, and then I'm going to jump to my history palette, and I'm going to select that layer via copy and go to the history brush. Now, there are a lot of different ways that you can adjust the brightness of eyes. I prefer to use the history brush. I find that it is much more forgiving than the dodge and burn tool. You can also use an adjustment layer on screen or multiply, which is essentially what this history brush is. So we're gonna, oops, I'm not gonna change it there. When I have my history brush selected, I have it on screen mode up here. It's really the same thing as if you did an adjustment layer on screen mode. I just like to be able to paint it on slowly with my opacity and flow. And in Photoshop, there are a gazillion different ways to do things, so there is no right or wrong. All right, so we've got some pretty tiny little eyes here, and they're really dark. So we do want to brighten it up. So the first thing I'm going to do, again on screen mode, my opacity is at 33, my flow is at 31. Doesn't have to be exact, I just like it between 30 and 35. I'm going to just brighten up that catch light and brighten up this catch light. So those catch lights are already there. I'm just bringing them out. And then I'm going to just kind of brighten up down here on the bottom part of his eye. Now you can see there's some green in there. We're going to take care of that from that reflection of the grass. So I'm going to zoom back out, make sure we haven't overdone it. Looks pretty good. And then I'm also going to make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm just going to kind of brighten up the whole little eye there. There we go. So then we can turn this layer on and off, and you can see the difference that made. Pretty significant, right? And I always recommend turning the layer on and off so you can test it. If you're like, oh, that's a little bit too much, maybe you want to pull that opacity down just a touch. Maybe to about 80% there, because it did look like a little much. All right, so zoom back out, looking good. Next thing I want to address is that green color cast. So I'm going to go ahead and flatten. It's another thing that I do. Again, it's not necessarily best practices, but I know I'm not going to come back to those eyes. So I just want to work quickly and efficiently when I'm editing images for my clients. So I'm done with those eyes. I went ahead and flattened it, and now I'm going to get rid of the green. So for that is quick and easy. I'm going to go over to my adjustment layer. I am going to grab a hue saturation adjustment brush. I am going to click on this little targeted adjustment tool, that little hand with the little arrows. I'm going to click on this green right under his chin. So you can see it selects that color. It's a lot of green, there's a lot of yellow. And I'm going to pull that saturation down, say goodbye to the green. I'm also going to pull up the lightness a little bit just to lighten it up. Now we zoom out, we're like, hold up, that's not what we want. That's a little much. No problem. Command I inverts that mask. Layer masks are magic in Photoshop. White reveals and black conceals. So you can see it's black, we can't see anything there. So now we're just going to grab B for our brush, and we have our brush right here, and you can see our brush is on white. So whenever we paint, we're going to be able to see it. So I'm going to get closer so I can see what I'm doing here, because I really just want to remove the green from the dog. And we're just going to remove, kind of paint on this green area here. Paint over here, right over there is a little green. Space bar, and you can drag to move your mouse around. I'm actually going to paint right here on his eye to get rid of that green in his eyeball. I don't like that. And then kind of up here. Now you want to be careful. You don't want to do too much on where the yellow is, where he has like a little bit of a darker fur, because he's a yellow lab. So he has some yellow, and since we're targeting some yellow, it's going to pull some yellow out of that. So you can see if I remove it from here, it tends to remove it a little bit too much, but we can paint some of that back on. So here we go. We're just going to get a little bit bigger brush, like on his chest, it's all green and yucky. Right over there. Now I'm not going to touch his back because there's a little bit of yellow there, but I can get that shoulder. I think I missed some spots right over here. There we go. Now to see if it's too much, you can always adjust the opacity a little bit. You can pull it down if it's a little too much. You can also pull it down to see the change you did. You can also hit that little eyeball to the left of that layer to turn it on and off. So you can see we got rid of that green. He's looking more like a yellow lab. He's more true to color. I do something like this almost every time I photograph a white dog, or that has white in them, on grass especially, or a black dog in the shade, because in the black fur, there's almost always blue, so you can use that same strategy to remove the blue. Just obviously choose blues, or you can select the color. For the blacks and the blues, I usually just change it to the blue channel. All right, that's looking good. We're going to flatten that layer. Again, might not be the best practice, but that's just how I roll. I like to live on the edge. So the next thing I see are all these annoying flyaways over here. So since this is going to be a nice print for the wall, I'm going to go ahead and just come in with my little spot healing tool and just clean these up. Can't take all of them. You don't need to take all of them, but like those long ones are unnecessary. We did not have a stylist on set for the pup. Okay. And honestly, that's looking pretty good. I would probably be ready to go there. Although, since I'm going to do this nicely for the wall, I'm going to show you my final secret weapon for finishing my images. So we're going to Command J for a new layer again. We're going to go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust 5. And this is a plugin. Topaz is a plugin for Photoshop. I believe they do Lightroom as well. It is a paid plugin, but it's a great company. They have a lot of great things. So this is the Classic Collection, and I like Detail Medium. Then I'm going to hit Apply, and I'm going to wait a few minutes. The only bummer about this is I don't think you can run this in an action because of how it's a plugin, which is kind of a bummer. Topaz, if you're listening, if there's a magical way that I can run this as an action, please let me know. I hate waiting for my computer. It's just wasting time. But c'est la vie, that's what it is. Okay, so we just wait for this to finish up. All right, and then we hit OK. So this is a little too much. You don't ever really want to use this at 100%, but you can see the detail that it kind of gives it almost a little bit of a painterly effect. I really love to do this on my final images before I print for a big piece, wall piece. But I'm going to pull this back down. I usually find that somewhere around 50% is ideal. This is 48%. There's before, there's after. That's even a little strong. There we go, maybe 39. So it just adds a little bit more detail on the fur. Now you can add a layer mask and just paint it on the fur if you like. I kind of like what it does to the background. Just adds a little bit more tonality back there. It's personal preference, really. Thanks so much for joining me for this edit. If you want to learn more about editing, Heather Lotnan, who is the Chief Editing Ninja at Hair of the Dog and creator of the Flourish Academy, and myself have created some different editing courses and tutorials, and you can learn more about that underneath this video. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'll see you next time.